And welcome, folks, to the first episode of the year of Tech Sales Advice. In fact, it's the first episode ever in theory, because the last couple of years I've called this the check-in with the doctor, and I've graduated now to Tech Sales Advice. I want to wish all of you a very happy new year. And I hope we have a few folks who will join us. Maybe we have a few folks live. If you're with us now, I encourage you to say hello. You're welcome to ask any questions. I am absolutely delighted to welcome today's guest. It's actually a gentleman I just met last week, and there's a reason I reached out to him, which we'll share. But he and I chatted for about a half an hour, and we just became, at least from my vantage point, instant friends. If at the very least, we think very much alike. Mr. Tom Banton. He runs pre-sales for Eightfold.ai. Tom, welcome, sir. How are you?
Chris, it's a blast and an honor to be here. Yes, I feel like you're my new best friend, so it's pretty cool.
well, welcome, sir. Tom, in the unlikely event that anybody who may be listening doesn't know who you are, do you mind taking just a minute to introduce yourself a little bit more formally, sir?
Sure. So my name is Tom Banton. I am the Vice President of Solutions Engineering at Eightfold AI. We use artificial intelligence to help people find their right career. We find the right career for everyone in the world. Before that, I was at Aptus. We were a huge partner of Salesforce. And before that, I was at Oracle. And then I was at Epicor, and I've had every title from pre-sales to solutions engineer, sales consultant, solution architect, value consultant, and business transformation. So I think I've done everything you can possibly do in pre-sales.
And I think when you and I spoke last week, am I right? Am I remembering right? You say, Chris, I gave my first demo in like 1994. Did I get that right?
Going back and doing the math, it's like 95 or 96. I did my first demo, and then I literally demoed 5 days a week, sometimes 2, 3 times a day through Y2K. And we literally would do a city a day because there was no Zoom, there was no internet, there was no Wi-Fi. And I taught a class at Pre-Sales Collective, and I did a thing with my team about how we used to have to carry with a client server network and go from place to place and actually create the network. So you'd have to get there an hour beforehand, make sure everything worked. And again, then you would pack it all. And then you had 2 huge suitcases, one that had the client server network, one that had the projector. So yes, it was very interesting demoing in the 90s, but Y2K was a fun time to demo.
I'm telling you. No, so this is an interesting question. Actually, I was talking to somebody the other day. So my first role, and by the way, I was called an application engineer when I first got into pre-sales in 2005. And I was handed my first, what was it? I think I was handed my first WebEx account back then. When did you first get some sort of, whether it was GoToMeeting or WebEx or something? When did you get your first account? Do you remember back then?
I joined Oracle in 2000, and I think that's when, and I think that was called Oracle Meetings or GoToMeeting, or I think something like that. But yes, but even then it was rare. We still were pretty much on site,
Oh yeah. I remember, I'd get on the plane and I'd have my laptop, I'd have the projector. Remember, we used to carry projectors with us. It's crazy. So let's talk a little. You've been doing this a long time, and you've had lots of different roles. And I know one of the things that I asked you about when we spoke last week is, what's one of the things that you're more passionate about? And you talked about the presentation. But before we get there, I know your sort of thinking around the role has evolved, and even the way you define the role. How would you define the role to someone who maybe doesn't even understand, or how do you think about it these days?
So, you have it right where our job is to sell. Somebody asks you what I do, I say I'm in software sales. If they dive deeper, I'll say, well, I run the team that does the product demonstrations, and that's when you see their eyes glaze over. But when somebody else asks me what's the role of an SE, what I say now is your role as an SE is to make your AE successful.
Mm,
And because ultimately they carry the bag, they have the quota on their shoulders. And the other piece of advice I always give is, get to know your AEs, find out what they're really good at, and then backfill what they aren't good at.
interesting.
So, and so some AEs are great at presenting and know the product really well, but maybe they're bad at logistics and arranging meetings and personal relationships. So, a good SC definitely is a partner to an AE, and how you work with one AE will be different than how you work. And obviously, I'm saying AE, but whether you call them account executive, but you're a salesperson, it's all about the partnership. And I'm a firm believer where I don't have assigned relationships between AEs and SCs. I like people to work with a variety of people because you learn something from each one. Obviously, relationships form between them. But again, it's always good to get to know an AE and find out what they're good at and let them stay in their lane and be good at that, and then try to backfill what they aren't good at.
Yeah.
But you're right. We're also responsible for the technical win. And the other thing I just read this morning while I was eating breakfast, more importantly, it's the business win. And that's why we've also seen this sort of push for business transformation, where you
Mm.
have somebody who's technical, and maybe you have somebody who really understands the business, and you convince both the technical team and the business team that this is the right solution for you.
Yeah. Well, and we have to tie the technical solutions, right? The technical capabilities that we talk about to business value, right? To outcomes. I mean, that's one of the mistakes that we make. I mean, this is we tend to focus too much on, like, what I like to say, the shovel, right? And not ultimately what they're trying to accomplish. Now, you were telling me a moment ago that you just started reading the book, and I know, obviously, as you've discovered, habit number one is to partner. Let's talk about discovery a little bit. Do you find that the discovery is an important part of the process for you and your team there?
So it's interesting. My whole career, I was in what's called CPQ, configure price quoting. All right. And really in sales process. And there we had to do a very deep discovery, because we literally would build a configuration model for whatever industry or company we're going to. And everybody would say, my business is completely unlike everybody else. Well, now I'm in the AR, so we would get very deep discoveries, and we would build beautiful custom demos. Here in the HR space, it's a little more common, but I still find that we need to, again, what are we trying to solve for? Because we have so much that we can show, and they're like, no, just show me what you do, and then I'll tell you what I'm trying to solve. And so it's really been a struggle here to get people to give us the time to understand their business. And then part of that is also we're dealing with, human resources, and sometimes it's hard to get them to open the kimono, and because a lot of this information is confidential as well too, and we're dealing with employees, but the best demos we always do are when we're given access to do a full discovery. And
Yeah.
it's really hard to get people to do that, and I think that's an AE has to get you a champion that understands, and that's where we have our best deals, when the AE really has a strong champion that understands what we can solve for. Okay, now I'll show you everything that we are trying to solve for.
Yeah. Do you, and Tom, I see this a lot these days, and I think I think the trend is going to continue, where customers, prospects just say, we've done some homework, we have some idea of what just show us your stuff, right? Just show us your platform. And a lot of us who have been doing this a long time, we're reluctant to show too much without getting a little bit of information, up front. What advice do you give to your people when faced with, just show me something?
It's hard because sometimes we do, our technology is so new that sometimes we have to show a little bit so people understand what we're trying to solve for. But even now, I'm trying to purchase different types of software for my team, and I'm kind of surprised that, like, I'm an open book, ask me any question, and people are just trying to show me what they do, and it's like, don't you want to understand what I'm trying? Oh, no, this is what we do. And I'm like, so I'm on both sides of it right now. But the other thing is, if I think even in a discovery, I still see SEs too quick to talk about what we do and
Mhm.
not let the customer talk. And it's like, if somebody's talking, just shut up and let them talk. It's like, I love Judge Judy. You have 2 ears and one mouth. You should be listening twice as long as you talk. And it's still hard to, like, somebody says, oh, to try and solve their problem, even during a discovery, let them talk. And that was the great thing about CPQ, was we would go in and say, show us how you're ordering something today. Walk us through your process of how you're ordering something. And so then you all of a sudden you're getting to see how they use their software. And then we would always say, now, what do you like about your tool? What do you wish you could change? You never call someone's baby ugly, because they could have written the last tool. But but again, at least now you got them into a rhythm. And it's been much harder in the HR space, because nobody wants to show us, how they onboard a person, or how they evaluate, or how they screen candidates, because that's kind of confidential information. So
yeah, well, and you have to build trust. By the way, I mean, that's one of the, what you just shared a moment ago. It's one of the better, this is called tech sales advice. I mean, that's one of the better pieces of advice. Like, when your prospect starts talking, just shut up. Right? Like, that sounds a little bit blunt, but it's so true. And I call it the dance, Tom, right? Like, they want to see something, rightfully so, right? So show them something. But I call it discovery in disguise, right? Like show them something, but the purpose is not to convince them. The purpose is to get them comfortable and start and begin to open up, right? Show them one thing, do it in the context of the outcome and the benefit, and then get them talking, right? Get them opening up. Now sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, and that was so much easier. So the other thing I used to tell people is, when someone interviews and they say, well, how much travel is associated with this job? And I'll always say, you're in charge of your schedule, but I would rather have somebody travel for the discovery than travel for the demo. Because it's when you're in front of somebody in a discovery, you're going to get much more time than when you schedule an hour over Zoom. And when you sit next to somebody, you are likely to see how they're using the tools today and get to know them a little bit, and maybe have coffee with them or go to lunch. So the discovery over Zoom it's really tough. Yeah. So if somebody it always ask if you can come on site, and obviously it's harder, especially with COVID, things like that. But if you can do a discovery on site and build the relationships, then your demo remotely is going to go much better than if you try to do a discovery remotely and then go try to forge a relationship during a demo. Yeah. What advice are you giving your people now that we are doing most everything through the lens of a camera? How are you coaching them differently? How are you, giving them guidance differently now? Again, cameras on. The camera is a set of eyes. You got to make eye contact when you're talking with people. If you're going to be taking notes or looking at another screen, and we do this for interviews too, say, all my information about you is over here. If I'm looking over here, I'm actually researching or I'm typing notes. I'm not checking email. But you've got to, when you talk to somebody, when you ask a question, you got to look at that camera. And when you respond to a question, you have to look at that camera. You can't be looking away. And again, give them time to talk. If you can, try to schedule discoveries with different people and say, okay, so I'll talk to you for 20 minutes. I'll talk to your next person for 20. Don't try to pull a bunch of people into a room. Give everybody one-on-one discoveries if you can if you can organize that. And again, that's where a strong champion will say, okay, these are the people you need to talk to and help you schedule that. Again, would you rather have 15 minutes of one-on-one time with somebody or be pulled into an hour meeting with 4 people? Yeah. There's no doubt. I remember one of the best classes I ever took in college. All right. Was a business English class, and I still use, and I was in college a long time ago. And what this instructor said, okay, I can pull you all into a 2-hour lecture or a 3-hour lecture, 3 times a week, or the staff here is, giving me permission to just give you 30 minutes one-on-one time. And at the end, she was actually working harder. But you would go in and you'd get 30 minutes with just this one person, and she would review what you did last week, and she would give you the assignment for next week. And it was so much better than being stuck in a class. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, again, try to talk to people individually. You also get them to open up. I'm afraid people are so afraid to ask questions in front of a group. Oh, what if I ask a dumb question? What if I say something about our process is bad and my boss is on the phone? But again, that takes a lot of orchestration and coordination and a strong relationship between your AE and your coach and your champion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other thought that comes to mind is it takes situational awareness. It takes a certain level of emotional intelligence, right? It's being clued in and tuned in to the people you're talking to, right? The subtleties. I mean, a moment ago you mentioned one of the mistakes you see is when we do get into a discovery, we're too quick to want to start talking about our solution, right? And it's having that awareness of, what is the message below the surface, right? What are they trying to say, like below the surface, right?
So next time you do a discovery, and we sometimes will do this with socially as well, try to go the entire discovery without saying I or we. Try and make it all about the customer. And every time you say I or we, check a box. And if you've done it more than a couple times, then you failed.
That's really good.
On the flip side, if you're listening to a friend socially, count how many times they say I or we, and you'll be amazed at some of the results you get.
Really well said. By the way, folks, I just want to take a pause. I'm speaking with Tom Banton from Eightfold. And Tom, we got a couple comments. Alvin, and I hope I'm saying this right, Regis chimed in, got to get the prospect to talk. We also have actually a question from Marta Kowalski. I hope I'm saying it, Kowalska. Makes such a connection. I'm not sure the sales rep would want to do that way around. Any stories around this or advice? So I think the way I'm interpreting, and Marta, by the way, thank you for the question. And by the way, if anybody else cares to ask a question or make a comment, I invite you to do so. I think the way I'm interpreting that is sometimes AEs maybe feel, I don't know, threatened by us as sales engineers trying to create that connection. Is that sort of how you take that question?
Well, I think a lot of people think that the showing up and the demo itself is more the presentation and the big show where we should all be on site for it. But another thing that you can do is, again, if I do the discovery on site, and the AE can come with me to form the relationship as well. But if the AE can travel on site for the demo and I do it remotely, I still have somebody there. And a lot of times what we'll even do is, we're all demoing workflows or notifications or things like that. You can even make the AE part of the demo. So again, you're pulling the remote world into the on-site world. Yeah. Obviously, every company has different travel policies. Not every company is open for letting visitors come in as well right now. But if you do have if somebody's saying, come here, learn my business on site, and you're okay traveling, then you should do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And if not, to your point, Tom, I just think at the end of the day, people buy from people, and we have to work that much harder to build relationship, right? We have to be, you mentioned the camera. I mean, we got to get the mechanics and the camera and all that down, but we also have to be human in our jobs, right? We have to be authentic. We have to be real, and we have to try to make those connections through the lens of the camera. Even to Marta's point, even if that takes a little bit more time. Does that resonate with you?
It does. And I think a couple other things, obviously, you and I are both standing for this meeting. I now stand for a lot of my demos. I stand for any kind of webinar. It's a different energy. You and I obviously think, my buddy Maureen Taylor at SNP, you've got to be in the frame. The camera can't be looking up. So I have my camera elevated so it's staring me in the eye. No one wants to look down at you and no one wants to look up at you.
Exactly.
Now, the one problem with standing, and I do get this sometimes, I move around too much, but it's better than sitting there. It's a different level of attention, and it's a different level of voice.
I mean, the whole. It's funny you should mention that. Actually, I had a call with someone on Friday, actually, and she said to me, she's like, "You're standing up, aren't you?" And I said, "Actually, yes, I am." right? And she said, my people need to be doing that more too. So this is a great segue into the presentation. I know one of the things that you're most passionate about is delivering. It's the, as I like to call it, it's the performance, right? A guy from one of my workshops, like it's the show, right? What do you consider to be some of the more important skills or characteristics of an effective presentation in front of the customer?
We've addressed some of it, cameras on, or at least on for introductions. Some people get distracted during a demo. If you say, hey, I'm going to turn it off my demo, but then turn it back on to end and follow up in next decks and questions. My whole team uses a tool called Zoom It if you're on a PC, Demo Pro if you're on a Mac. If you're spinning your mouse around what you're trying to show, use an annotation tool. It's a huge, and we'll have people actually say, your software is really cool, but how did you draw those boxes around and point the arrow? And you have to practice it. It's one of those things, again, one of your 6, effect habits. You've got to practice using Zoom It or Demo Pro. You can't just show up, but use it. And then you can use it too much as well. But, so there's the mechanics of the demo, going slow, and then, pausing, asking for questions, asking for feedback throughout the demo, pulling in people like, hey, Chris, I'm about to show you what we talked about in the discovery, because Chris, you might not be paying attention. Chris, did you just see what I showed you? Chris, I just showed you what you asked about in the discovery. What'd you think about that, Chris? Using names, so again, a lot of times I'll have a notepad and I'll just write down the first names and the departments of people, trying to pull people into the presentation. Again, your goal of a demo is to get to another meeting. It's not to show them everything that you possibly have. It's to show them enough so that they say, we want to see more. And we still make the mistake of, I'm going to show you everything I have, and so you're going to be so impressed. But no, if I only show you 15 minutes of the 6-hour demo that I prepared for and you want to see more, then the meeting was a success. So,
amen.
I mean, we kind of went down a tangent there, but and again, if somebody's talking, let them talk. Even if they're talking over your demo, let them talk. And unless, again, now we get into objection handling, unless they're taking away from your message, then you got to pull the power back.
Yeah. No, amen. I mean, you're speaking my language. I mean, so many of the things that you said there are so true. First of all, what is everyone's favorite word in their particular language? It's their name, right? So use people's name, right? Ask them questions, pause, keep them engaged. And I'm sure you see this all the time too. So many times I'll see someone giving a demonstration. They'll go 20 minutes without coming up for air, right? And by the way, sometimes it comes from a good place. There's a lot of things that they want to cover. Maybe they've got limited time, right? But look, we're not here to just throw stuff at people, right? I mean, it's a conversation. It's a sales conversation. By the way, there's a couple of guys chiming in that I just want to say. Andy Cooper, good to see you. He actually was in one of my workshops recently. Andy, you're right. I mean, I think most of us would like to get back into in-person meetings on the regular. My suspicion is this virtual world is to a great degree here to stay. What do you think, Tom? Do you agree with that perception?
So between Delta and Omicron, was HR Tech. And HR Tech, for those of you who don't know, it's the largest HR technology conference. It's in Vegas, and Eightfold decided to go all in for it. And even I was like, why are we doing this? This is crazy.
Yeah.
And we had a massive booth, and a lot of companies were pulling out right as we went into it. We got there, and again, I had 8 demo stations and 3 conference rooms. So that's, and you can't do a trade show all day long. That's a whole nother class. But so I should have had about 22 SEs staffing this. I had 16, and 8 of them were brand new, had been there less than a month. So we were slammed, and what we were told by everybody that came in was, thank you so much for being here. We were so sick of being virtual. We just wanted to come and see
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And the happy hours that we hosted were slammed. And it was a little freaky when you're in a crowded room and nobody's wearing a mask, but everybody's socially. And only one person out of the 50 we sent got COVID. So, I mean, and they're fine. But everybody was so excited, and working with people again was a muscle that was fun to flex. It was a totally different experience. So it's all about people's comfort level, but presenting well. And I did hear one thing that I really liked is when you're doing a recorded demo, it should be like the person is sitting next to you. It shouldn't be, and I gotta credit my friends at Consensus for saying that, but so it should be like they're sitting right next to you. It shouldn't be such a produced thing. But I do think people are ready to get back and working together. And again, I think if you just say, hey, it's been our experience that you understand our technology much better when we're sitting in the room together as opposed to over Zoom, and give them that window to say, yeah, come on in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the recorded demo. I mean, I love that idea of imagine they're in the room. I've even heard people put like pictures of people behind their camera so they feel like they're at least talking to somebody. And incidentally, I think everybody knows this. This is not a recording. This is we are actually live right now, as I like to say, unscripted, unrehearsed, and somewhat unpredictable. Incidentally, Tom, good question. I don't know if you know Ramsey. So Ramsey's another good friend. He runs the We the Sales Engineer podcast. If any of you have not checked out Ramsey and his podcast, please do so. Ramsey, always good to see you, my friend. He said some people I've talked to say, I'll just interpret that if he uses names too much, it comes across as too salesy. What are my thoughts about that? Now, I have an opinion, but what do you think, Tom? Can we go overboard using names, and can we like cross the line of coming across maybe inauthentic or too salesy?
We can. You can't. You've got to use it in context. You can't just drop it for the sake of dropping it. It's like, Ramsey, I agreed with the point you made, or hey, again, it's really, if I'm going to show you something that you asked to see, or if I know this is one of your questions, you should be grateful that I'm queuing you up for this. Absolutely. So that you don't miss it, so that you can be a part of it. It's better to pull you in before than to go to you afterwards. Oh, Chris, did you see what I just showed? And you're going to say, oh yeah, I did. Because you're going to be too embarrassed to admit that you were checking your email or looking out the window at your neighbor's Grubhub delivery that's coming or something.
No, it's incredibly well said. And I had a similar thought, right? I mean, I do think it's important to use names, but to your point, there is a point maybe where we go overboard. Maybe it's not authentic. I mean, I think the question we have to ask is, does it feel like natural conversation? B, are you doing it to try to be salesy, right? Like, are you trying to use it as some sort of lever, or are you sincerely just trying to engage, right? And Ramsey, a couple of years ago, he did like the top 10 things not to do during a demo, and one of them was to say good question after every question, right? That's another good example. Once in a while, it's perfectly fine to say good question, right? But I was guilty of this years ago, right? I was in a demo, and after every question, I was like, good question. And it almost became a joke. Like, people were saying to me, let me guess, Chris, good question. Right? I mean, so I think we have to be as natural and authentic in our communication, in our presentation as we can be. Does that resonate with you, Tom?
So two things that we've touched on. The best demos are a conversation, not a presentation. And nothing kills a conversation or a presentation faster than repetition, whether it's the repetition of using someone's name or saying good question or good answer. So, you've got to watch how often you repeat phrases, gestures, things you show.
Incredibly well said. Yeah, we have to. And by the way, I'm even still guilty of this from time to time. I listen to some of my recordings. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to. I use write sometimes too much, and So, but we always need to be aware of how we're coming across. Incidentally, another good friend. I don't know if you know Kerry, but Kerry Sokolsky and I have become good friends. He runs an organization called Pre-Sales Mastery, and Kerry, always good to see you, my friend. Mentions, and I love this: our brains are hardwired to respond to our names differently from other words. So it's massively useful. Kerry, thank you for sharing. Incidentally, and Tom, I'd love to get your opinion on this as well. Studies have also shown that the brain automatically goes to work when it hears a question being asked. So one of the things that I talk a lot about in my workshops is, as often as you can, ask questions throughout your demonstration. In fact, before you show what you're about to show, lead with a question, such as, so how would you typically do this, right? Or have you ever considered what might be, and then fill in the blank, because the brain attempts to find its own questions or its own answers, and it draws people in. Does that resonate with you, Tom? Have you ever tried to work questions into the demos?
Well, I think again, we just said we want our demos to be a conversation. And unless the person's talking, the only way to get them to talk is to ask them questions.
Amen.
And and again, as I always say, you're giving, you're presenting, you are allowed to ask for feedback at any point in time during your presentation. Now, one of the things I always say is, does this make sense? And that's that's the thing I say way too much. And now you're insulting the audience, but ultimately, are you understanding what I'm showing you? Can I move on? And how do you get that? Did you like what you just see? Did you want to comment on that before we move on?
Right.
And trying to get people to say, yes, I liked what I saw, or I resonated with me, or I didn't understand. People are afraid to admit that they don't understand what you're showing.
Yeah.
And I'm the king of dumb questions. I just know that, I'm going to ask the question that nobody else wants to ask because everyone's afraid to ask it. And I can't tell you how many times I've asked what I thought was like the most basic question. I'm like, am I a moron? People are like, oh, thank God you asked that question because I was afraid to ask it. So just you just keep in mind that your audience is probably afraid to ask that same question.
I absolutely love that. The king of dumb questions. That may go down in the list of quotable quotes from this program. It's interesting. As you were speaking, I was observing you, and you just have you seem to have a natural enthusiasm about you. How important do you think is enthusiasm and sort of energy when you bring, when you're presenting to a group?
It all depends on, do you want this much energy if we're sitting in a conference room of 2 or 3 people? Probably not. Are you in front of a stage at Dreamforce? Then yes, you want it. So, you have to temper it based on who you're speaking to. You have to be, I'm energetic and excited right now because I'm excited about this topic. And that's the other thing I always tell people is, if you can't get excited about what you're demoing, then you're probably working for the wrong company. You have to find the 2 or 3 or 4 things that you ultimately you want your audience. We used to have what we called wow moments, and you used to get like a red X if you couldn't do 3 to 5 wows in every demo, and we used to count wows. And but ultimately you want your audience to say wow, and you need to, when you are first evaluating your software and you're demoing, when you say, oh wow, that's really cool how that works, when you show that same thing, I really think this is cool, and you need to let that emotion show. You need to, and are you still excited by that after you've shown it 200 times? Maybe. But if you're not, you can still say, when I first joined here, this is what I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Or so you have to be excited by what you have, the problems you're solving, and so that was a great thing coming from consulting and coming from manufacturing and doing CPQ. I could say, I used to be in your shoes. I used to be on the other side trying to build this thing and sell this thing. So, trying to say, I know what you're doing. And so now we're saying, I've been in SC for so long. I know what you all are going through. I've had my demos go horribly wrong. I've had my internet go down. I've had the cameras not work. these are the things we've done to get over it.
Stuff happens, right? Stuff happens. And absolutely love what you're saying. And I could not agree more. If you're not excited about the problems you're solving, if you're not enthusiastic about the solution you're presenting, you might be with the wrong company, right? And I really do believe that part of our role is to get people excited, about what's possible, get people excited about a different future. By the way, we've got a couple of comments streaming in. I just don't want to miss them. Alvin mentioned questions at times are a good objection handling technique. Could not agree more. Don't ask any questions. Try what caught your attention. That is, I love that one. Incidentally, folks, I just showed quite a few things. Is there something in particular that resonated with you, right? Sergey, hello, nice to see you. Have you been in demos and presentations when you try as much as you can to engage, but face silence, when people do not ask questions or simply very short answers? Tom, I have a thought, but before I share, what do you got?
The other thing, as you may have guessed, I'm kind of an open book. And even in a demo, I'll just say, you all are really quiet. I thought you might be more into this content than you are, and again, just ask, if this isn't resonating, please let me know if I'm missing the mark. Because rather than me just continuing to present, let's figure out what is important to you, and I'll come back and solve that problem. But I can't tell you how many times people have said, no, this is exactly what we want. You're just the 5th meeting of 5 today. As long as they say yes, you're doing fine. Some groups are just quiet.
Yeah.
And then another thing you can also do is, again, a lot of times people don't want to give too much feedback in front of a group. Because so again, personal thank you notes at the end. Thanks for all your time. You have any questions, and try to work with people, and that might get you to, you have to go through this one person if you want to talk to us. But you can always thank people for their time. If keep in mind that you may be doing 1 or 2 demos a day. They could be watching 3 or 4 or 5 a day, yeah. Or again, they're doing 3 or 4 or 5 in between their day job.
Yeah.
So their calendars are just stacked. And so
one of my favorite sayings, we sell for a living, but most people that we're talking to don't buy for a living, right? Like this is outside of their sort of normal day to day, right? The one thought that I wanted to share, and you sort of touched on this as well, I think it begins right up front. The moment we launch in, I even say, look, even when I run my web, like, look, folks, this is going to be interactive. I'm here for you. So I am going to pause frequently to make sure this is resonating with you. And frankly, I'll even get to the point where I'll say, folks, particularly if you can't see them. I mean, I'm sure there are some people that are listening right now or will listen in the future. You've been in a demo, you're going through your flow, right? You can't see the people and they're not speaking. And what are we inclined to do? I'll just keep going ahead. Folks, I am one of the most stubborn individuals in the world when it comes to this. Folks, because I can't see you, it's really hard to tell if this is resonating with you. And frankly, we don't want to waste your time. So could I trouble one of you to provide some feedback? Is this resonating? Do you see how what we're showing you here aligns with some of the objectives we talked about? Because if not, maybe we can just save us all some time, right? Like that might put some people off, but look, we're busy people too, right? We're not here to waste people's time. So anyway, Sergey, I do appreciate your question. Obviously, that struck a chord with me. I want to give sort of press time to the comments. David McCulley, which I love. David, good to see you. He says, put the blame on yourself, right? Folks, and I absolutely love that. Folks, maybe I'm not doing a very good job of articulating, right? Maybe I haven't done a good job of tying or making it clear how important we think this is. Is this not resonating? One more. Let's say hello, and I hope I'm saying it right. Maybe it's Fasal. How do you handle a meeting, a presentation where a topic is raised that was not part of the agenda, and it comes from a key stakeholder decision maker? How do you coordinate with the exec? Now, I have a very specific, Fazal, thank you for your question. I have a very specific answer, but I'm going to let you take a swing at this one first, Tom. How would you handle this situation?
Let's go to the first topic first, though, which was, again, if a meeting is going south or you're missing the mark, don't blame but there was a book I read, I believe the title was actually called Getting Naked, where it was all about, again, taking the blame. And I remember saying, obviously we're missing the mark. We obviously weren't prepared for this meeting today. We apologize for that. Give us time to come back. And so I have done that, even when I know we are prepared. And I guess it does go to the next topic where, hey, they brought up something that wasn't part of the agenda. You can say, wasn't what we prepared for. I'm sorry if we missed this, if we missed this during the discovery, that this was going to be a key part. We can have a discussion on it. You might be able to, again, that's dangerous because sometimes you'll pivot and try to solve it right then and there. But before I go on a tangent trying to solve this issue, can you just tell me a little bit more about it? And then we'll decide if we need to come back and address it. But usually you can at least say, this is how we would solve it at a high level. Here are a few things I can show you that point to that, or here are a few customers that are doing something like that. But again, I'm sorry that we weren't prepared to address this. We didn't realize that this was one of your important topics. You didn't say this during the discovery.
Right,
you can't be defensive. You can't.
Well, and if I may, one of the reasons I love the question is he actually touched on sort of the two. I ask myself two questions particularly when I get a difficult question. I ask myself two quick questions: who's asking the question, and is the question in scope or out of scope? Now, the second question only works if we've set scope in the beginning, right? Like I always say, let's set expectations up front. Like, here's what we've heard, here's what we're here to do today, right? And here's sort of the context for today's meeting, right? Now, if I get a question from someone who's, what I call the uninvited guest, right? Like Bob from down the hall heard the eightfold guys were in town to give a demo, and he just figured he'd show up, and yet he starts asking difficult questions that are out of scope. The mistake that we make is we waste time addressing those questions, right? I actually defer to those questions politely, but this question that Fazal just mentioned, like key decision maker asks a question that's out of scope, I drop into discovery.
Right.
Oh, very interesting question. I don't recall that being mentioned before. Could I trouble you to elaborate on why? How does that fall, in list of priorities with some of these other things? That person may wave you off. Come on, actually, Chris, never mind. I was just curious. We're good, right? Or he or she may say, well, actually, that's one of the more important things. All right, well, now let's dig into it, right? Does that resonate with you, Tom?
Oh no, absolutely. But also, especially in a Zoom meeting, how do you know? I mean, you may not know if they're a stakeholder. So one of my demos during the 90s, we were at a factory in, I want to say Tennessee or something like that. And it was, one of those where, again, we brought the network, the projector, and it was a giant U with there's probably 20 people or so.
I mean, I could literally
picture. And this is one of my favorite stories too. This is like one of my first demos too, and I'm going to go into it. But we're doing the demo, and one of my SE mentors was presenting, and the conference room door is open because it was a nice day out, and a squirrel comes running into the room, and he looks up and he says, "Oh, I see lunch is here early," and goes back to his demo. Probably not a great thing to say, but I noticed that, this older woman, very regal, is smoking a cigarette, which you also don't see anymore, in the back of the room. And I'm just looking, okay, who is this person? And she goes out to finish her cigarette, and I follow her out there, and she's like, "Do you smoke?" I'm like, "No, I just kind of wanted to like hang out and get some." She was the president of the company. But going back, how do you know like who stakeholders are, especially in a Zoom meeting, unless they have their name on and you're actively linking them, in which case you're not paying attention to the meeting. But any chance you have to do discovery as to an issue is always good.
Yeah.
So again, if you can turn that demo into a conversation and learn more about the customer, especially if it's important. As far as objection handling, I told you, good person for you to pull on here is Gordon Thompson. He does a whole thing on objection handling and actually analyzing the question. Is it neutral? Is it purpose serving? Is it negative? And then what path do you go down, and how, and then how do you pull the energy back from a negative question? That's another thing that we teach. It's just like, you've got to answer all those questions and address them, but you just don't want to give that person too much attention or too much power.
Well, and there's two thoughts come to mind. First of all, if you don't know who the person is, you sort of have to err on the side of safety.
Correct.
Right? You sort of have to err on the side. By the way, this happened to me, and I won't go into the long-winded version of the story, but somebody asked me a question and I wasn't sure, and shame on me, I should have known. But I err on the side of giving him my full and direct attention. Turned out to be the CRO. So it was a pretty good, it was a pretty good person to give the attention to. But the other, and I think I lost the other thought. What was my thought? I think I lost the other thought. So just err on the side, of precaution. Oh, I know what it was. Is questions are insights in disguise, right? Every question has some context. Every question has a purpose, right? That's as a sales engineer, as a pre-sales, pay attention to the questions. Are they just trying to make themselves look good in front of the boss, right? Are they trying to make you look bad, right? Or are they sincerely interested? Like, are they sincerely curious because they're starting to take this solution seriously, right? Questions are insights in disguise. And that is one of the biggest things we make. We hear the question and we just want to focus on answering the question. Look between the lines, right? What are they really saying? By the way, I just want to say hello to Rakesh. Do you bring in competitive differentiation in the demo proactively to make it more effective, or wait till you get asked specific questions? Rakesh, nice to see you. Thank you for your question. Again, I have a thought, but Tom, I'll invite you to share if you have a thought.
You can, during your part of the demo conversation, you should always be saying what you do better than your competition, and you should be playing to your strengths. But unless you're directly asked to talk about the competition, during the presentation, or asked a question about it, no, I would never bring up a competitor's name again, unless I'm directly asked. And even then, we always do try to take, the high road. I believe this is what we do better. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
If you think this is something that they do better, then let me know that, and we'll dive deeper into this topic. But your whole demo is setting up a competitive trap for what you do better.
Exactly. Well, and that's what I like to say. I've heard some people say leave little landmines. I've heard people say leave competitive traps, right? We may not necessarily be calling out a competitor, but we may say something like, regardless of the solution you decide to work with, you should really make sure it does this, or
this.
Be sure not to overlook this capability. This is an important one, right? Something of that nature. So again, Rakesh, thank you. And by the way, my good buddy Andy Ryan is with us as well. He now runs customer success with Relayer, and a brilliant pre-sales mind. Andy, always good to see it. Tom, if you can believe it, we've been at this for almost an hour.
I know. I just looked at the clock like, wow, that was fast.
And I told you this was going to go fast. Now I have a lightning round that I do. So folks, if you're still with us, first of all, thank you who joined us. We're gonna the landing gear is out. We're gonna land this plane here at the top of the hour. But I do have just a couple quick questions. If I can ask you just a couple quick questions. Question number one. As you reflect on your career, what what do you consider to be the best piece of advice that you got on your journey?
Boy, that's a hard one. I mean, part of it was, again, people buy from people, make real connections, and just, if somebody is giving you feedback, listen to it, even if you don't agree with it. It's how somebody is feeling. It's how somebody is perceiving. You can't take away their feelings from you.
Mm.
So, you can't correct their feelings. It's how they feel. So you've got to be open to feedback.
I absolutely love that. It's funny. I was talking to my son just the other day. He's 25. He's been in the professional world for 3 years, and he was talking to somebody, and I told him something very simple. I was like, "Look, son, like, I'm giving you some advice, but take what I have to say with a grain of salt. You talk to some other folks, take what they like, filter everything you hear by and find truth for yourself. But you've got to have an open mind to begin with." But by the way, David McCauley is asking, what's the etiquette with video? We're running out of time, David, but very quickly, for what it's worth, I always have my video on. Every time I join, and I'm still old school. I like to put on a collar shirt. Every meeting that I enter, I have my video on. And I find that when we open with video on, people tend to join us on video. So David, that's my feedback. All right, question number 2 for you, Tom. So I asked you about the advice that you got. What advice, if someone came to you and said, what advice do you have for me? I'm thinking about pre-sales. What advice would you give them?
Well, I think it's, why do they want to do? I mean, again, are they doing this because they want to solve problems? Are they doing this because they like to present? So one of the people on my team, she's just a people person, and she realized she wasn't a technology person. She liked a little bit of technology, but she was a people person. So again, you're going to be working with people, and you need to be passionate and positive. So if you can't, again, be excited by what you're showing, passionate and positive about it, then it's not the right role for you.
I love that. I love that. And by the way, one of the things that I heard sort of between, the lines there, know your why. Right? You want to get into this role? Know your why.
But a lot of people just fall into this role as well. I mean, I think we're seeing more people actually now being able to choose this as a career. This career chose me, but I ran with it.
Yeah. Well, clearly it chose well. One final question for you, sir, and then I'm going to give you your day back. If you could ask me one question, what might it be?
So I guess what brings you, so you've gone from, do you miss being in front of customers and actively selling? You're selling yourself and your services right now, but do you miss pitching a product?
Very good question. I do not necessarily miss pitching a product. And it's funny. It's actually a very interesting question, actually, Tom, because as you know, I run workshops. And let me put it this way. My best days are days that I run workshops. If I wasn't running workshops week in and week out, I would not love what I was doing. But I love being in front of a group of people. That's part one. Part two is I tell people in my workshops, I have 2 jobs, folks. One job is running workshops like this. The other job is selling workshops like
right.
This. And those are the 2 favorite parts of what I do. And if it were up to me, that's all I would do. And I wouldn't, there's all kinds of administrative stuff that I've got to do now that I'm running my business. I don't like that part. It's dealing with people. It's selling what I do. And by the way, what's the part of selling that I like the most is sincerely trying to understand people and hear their stories and hear what they're struggling with and hearing what they're trying to accomplish. And if my workshop is a good solution, recommending my solution. And by the way, it's not always. Sometimes, I talk to some people, I'm like, you know what? There's probably other solutions that might be better than mine, right? And I'm at peace with that. So yes, if I was not doing one of those two, there's only one other thing that I would do. Be a sales engineer. If I wasn't doing what I'm doing, I'd probably be calling you for a job.
We're hiring.
There you go. Amen. Tom, it has been an absolute delight, sir. Thank you so much. And it's probably hard for people to believe that you and I literally met last week, but I think we felt like we clicked almost instantly. Any final thoughts in closing before we put a bow on our conversation today?
No, just know that there's so many different aspects to this role. We need behind the scenes demo people. We need value consultants if you're more attuned to numbers. We need business transformation if you're more about business than technology. There are multiple swim lanes to go down in this career. And we do need those people that can stand in front of a stage and present at Dreamforce. But we also need those people that can sit right next to somebody and walk them through a presentation one-on-one.
Yeah.
So, there's so many different things you can do. And I have so many different personalities, even on my team right now, and they're all amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic, Tom. Thank you so much. By the way, we got a question. If you fall into it, why say? But by the way, I think some of us fall into it and just realize that this is the ideal role for us. I would submit that probably some people quote fall into it and don't stay. So also Alvin says, Chris, what's the 7th habit? Actually, it's funny you should ask, Alvin, and I appreciate the question. There is a 7th habit that I didn't include, but maybe that'll be a future conversation in one of these sessions. So folks, thank you so much for joining Tom and myself. Tom, thank you so much for being a guest. Folks, if you want to follow these, there's a hashtag tech sales advice. All these are going to be listed under that. So you can go back and see, previous ones, and obviously follow us in the future, share it with anybody else who might be interested. And of course, Tom, thank you so much, sir. Good luck on this year. And
thank you.
I hope you'll not be a stranger and come back and visit me another time.
Would love to.
All right, man. Be well. Thanks all.
Bye.